Big visions for our cities often start with ambitious master plans, 20-acre sites, sweeping infrastructure, and promises of transformation. But as exciting as they sound, these projects can struggle under the weight of financing challenges, shifting market cycles, and the difficulty of sustaining community engagement over decades. On the other end of the spectrum are smaller, more incremental interventions, storefront upgrades, parklets, infill housing, and neighborhood-scale design moves that reshape our everyday experience of place. These fine-grained opportunities can feel more organic, more participatory, and often create some of the most beloved neighborhoods we know today. In this episode of Building Better Cities, I'm joined by Roberto Jenkins and Shruti Shankar from Studio 111 and RDC to explore this tension between top-down master planning and bottom-up placemaking. Together, we'll talk about how incremental projects in places like Long Beach's Design District are reshaping communities, what it means to design at the human scale, and how partnerships can unlock lasting urban change. I'm Kate Gasparo, and this is Building Better Cities. So, Shruti, this is the first time we're meeting, but Roberto, you and I have known each other for, I want to say 5 years now. Maybe longer than that. We worked together on some of the largest, I would say, ambitious master plans in the Bay Area and in the Midwest. So I wanted to start there because what draws people to these big visions is often the promise of a lot of housing, a lot of placemaking, a lot of excitement, but they're often coupled with a lot of challenges. I was wondering if you could talk through the challenges of implementation when you're thinking about these large visions, because then I want us to sort of break down into smaller projects and the promise of those.
Yeah, that's great. As you pointed out, our previous experience has been on these larger, very exciting master plan sites. The draw to me is the untapped potential in the fact that they're underutilized sites in urban cores. So usually we're talking about, let's say, 20 acres or more that require this shared infrastructure component that has to come first. And that's kind of one of the challenges, right? How do you set up land to become an extension of a city? Our experiences in Bay Area and in the Midwest. The Midwest one is a good example of a project using TIF, which has a bit of a contentious history in California, the tax increment financing, to help solve that early challenge of the infrastructure. There's a couple of years ago, a good research paper by Turner Center that looked at the history of TIFs, more specifically in California, where it was actually the first state to implement it back in the 1950s. And it's highlighted the concerns that usually come along, which is what we're seeing in these master plans: private sector enrichment, there's inadequate community participation, and you're physically, social, and culturally displacing low-income residents. So apart from that policy side of things, the implementation part of the problem in these larger master plans that has kind of seen them, in my experience, dwindle down over the past few years has been that it's usually chasing the market. So our example in the Bay Area started as a retail mall, then it went to mixed-use residential, then it went to biotech and innovation. It's just this constant turn of what is the key driver in the project that's going to help that phrase start. So I think what Shruti and I will get to in the next phases is also how can you think of a first phase that, and Shruti will talk about it more, the hardware versus software. The hardware can't be done. How do you start activating these spaces to not let them just sit on a shelf?
So you talked in two parts. One is the financing component, that these large projects require innovative financing. And then when you're talking about how do you phase something that's so big and make sure that the market is predictable over a 15, 20-year cycle as you're building out a master plan. And that's always difficult for developers to gauge. So what we're going to spend a lot of today talking about is the incremental changes that are being made with urban infill and how that more organic process helps us build some of our favorite neighborhoods. Because if you think about Hayes Valley in San Francisco or the riverfront in Boston, these types of spaces weren't just built with a master plan. They were built incrementally with separate investments over a long period of time. So what does a fine-grained approach to urban development look like in contrast to the master plans that we just talked through?
Great question. Even when we have a master plan project, what I've tried to do, and at this current firm too, is move try and spread the wealth and not just have it like one developer is doing all the blocks and they all look exactly the same. So usually we try and convince them that there's sure a keeper of the master vision, but focus on individual parcels and breaking them up at a smaller scale and allowing different scales of developers to approach each block in a different manner. That hopefully takes us away from the super block approach that was really prevalent in the 60s and 80s that led to public housing and these very large scale, hard to live in, like they don't respond to the scale of humans that well. So really being able to break that down in terms of physical scale and also on the development side, like encouraging different types of approaches. Like there can be, for example, one parcel that's low income housing, then another parcel that's developed as a pop-up retail market kind of. One single developer won't create that diversity. So really trying to break it down has been, at least on my end. I don't know how it's worked on your end.
Yeah, I have different thoughts on thinking about things as more incremental, fine-grained, tactical, and maybe temporal. But I think there's a variety of maybe more bottom-up approaches that are worth giving time and attention to, which has become harder with things like zoning and regulations that make development harder and more expensive, driving a lot of that development into the hands of people that can assemble capital, right? So it's really put a lot of people who otherwise would have agency to shape the city out of the practice of city making, which maybe sounds very jargony, but it's really how a lot of cities were built historically over time, people kind of shaping their environments. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to think about it from a design lens, but also from a policy, planning, finance lens.
And I want to first start on the design lens because, Shruti, you've shaped Studio 111's design principles. And when we talk about small scale or neighborhood scale interventions, I want you to lay out the buffet of options. And maybe that's a demeaning way of saying it's not really a buffet. All these are very intentional interventions. But what exactly does it mean? And what kinds of elements or spaces are we focusing on when we talk about small scale interventions?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends, but often it's about working, as Roberto said, at the scale of the block or even lower, the scale of the building, the scale of the sidewalk, the scale of the human being that's going to be experiencing the space, right? Because when you think in mega development scale, you're talking in acres, millions of dollars of investment. Ultimately, for someone who's on the ground walking the city, they don't really know or have any way to experience any of that complexity other than through how does this look and feel in my environment right now. And so we're talking storefronts, alleys, small lot infills, parklets, which has been a huge part of our work for a long time, facade improvements, things that can tangibly affect the quality of what an urban space feels like for a person that's living, working, experiencing the neighborhood. These are all interventions that are inherently human scaled. One of the challenges of more top-down master plan type of development is you're starting at 50,000 feet and you lose a lot of momentum by the time you get to the 10-foot sidewalk level. A lot of decisions have been made, a lot of efficiencies have been put in place that start to make a place feel very
sterile,
maybe monotonous or sterile. Exactly. So from a design standpoint, I think those are all kind of, for us, it's been a very good frame to position all of our work in, because we don't just do smaller scale work. We do larger developments that often encompass an entire city block or even larger, 6 or 7 acre sites. From a design standpoint, what keeps bringing us back to this idea of how do we create authentic, fine-grained urbanism that feels vibrant is how do we put people at the center and design at the scale of a person experiencing this.
I like the frame of the top-down versus bottom-up approach. And the challenges with master planning is that community engagement, especially over such a long period of time. And with these smaller moves or interventions, how do they allow the community to sort of co-evolve with the built environment and create the cyclical relationship between people and place?
I think it's about the question of who gets to make the city, right? And again, with the top-down investment model, oftentimes things get imagined by a single hand and funded by a single source. It's often a lot of different sources coming together, but one pot of money, it tends to produce spaces that are often generic. Where in contrast, cities that are shaped by many hands, small businesses, neighborhood groups, artists, residents feel more layered, they feel more alive and more rooted in their communities. These are also about enabling agency. When we talk about community engagement, it needs to be about more than just asking people, what would you like? We will provide that for you. And it's more about giving people, helping community members shape their own environment, sometimes by creating new models of doing things or forging partnerships that didn't exist before. I mentioned the parklets before. That's a great example in my mind because, parklets were a guerrilla idea that started up in San Francisco, but the city's bike coordinator in Long Beach, where we're headquartered, saw this early in San Francisco and said, wouldn't this be a great idea for Long Beach? And then he actually reached out to some local businesses, some restaurants that were looking to expand, but didn't have the space for it. And he reached out to us at Studio and assembled this group of people that were willing to think about how do we make this happen here, right? And it had so many direct benefits that didn't come down from someone at the top thinking in urban planning terms. It was a business trying to expand while still staying in place. It was a bicycle coordinator thinking, how can I make this street safer for bikes? And could this calm traffic down? And it was a design firm like us that's very much about like small scale incremental placemaking that's community based, that's thinking this is a great way to get a group of people together to try something that hasn't been tried before. I also want to say, just building on that idea of how these shape people and have this cyclical relationship with the neighborhood, these kinds of smaller scale things can be very iterative and participatory, and they can invite feedback to allow places to evolve in real time. It's not you ask a community group what they want, you go out and build it and it's done. It's how do you test it? How do you work with local partners to try something in a very cheap way without investing a lot of capital dollars? And that's kind of the whole ethos of tactical urbanism. How do you do that? And then continue to evolve it as you go. And what that does is it acknowledges that cities are not static. They're ecosystems, they keep evolving and shape their internal forces as they evolve. This goes to the idea that Roberto said about hardware and software. There's the hardware, which is often what architects and city planners tend to associate themselves with: the buildings, the streets, the parks, transit, all of that infrastructure. And some of that does have to be more permanent, if you will, like designed with thought so it stays for longer. But the software is all the other intangibles that are really driven by people. It's the economy, the politics, cultural norms, governance models, and all of these things have just as much power in shaping how the city comes together. And so when we design a space, we're not just designing form. At Studio, as architects, we're also engaging with the underlying software that determines how a space is used. We're constantly working to build that software by investing in community relationships, by investing in partnerships with people that can help us find new ways of doing things.
I think you have a unique perspective when it comes to Long Beach because the firm is headquartered there. And you've been involved in the evolution of the downtown area and specifically the Long Beach Design District. And from what you've shared with me so far, it feels like this is a living case study of that hardware, software integration. I was hoping that the both of you could talk through this project and what were the first interventions that started to lay the foundation for this design district.
Yeah, I have a lot to say on the subject. So Roberto, I'd be curious for you to lead off with, as someone who's experienced it more recently, what your impressions were. And then I'd love to dive into the history a little bit more.
I've only had about 6 months to experience it, but I've been incredibly impressed by the level of community organization in the blocks around our office in the design district. There's an event every single night by a different group. I have felt like our office has been a key part in kind of promoting that and creating those spaces for that to happen. Living in Southern California, where it's rare to have this walkable environment, I can really tell both the history of the smaller spaces that started this and how it's grown and taken over more of the streets. And every week there's a new restaurant opening in the next corner that wasn't there. It's just been incredibly lively and unexpected in a good way.
I share that. It's been very heartwarming to see all of this evolve. It actually started much before the conception of the design district. It's always been in our ethos to be sort of community connectors and working with community partners to try and shape urban places. I think this was back in 2015 or 2016. Our entire office, RDC Studio 111, all the work groups made a very deliberate move that really embodied kind of this idea of working in community. We relocated from a high-rise office tower, oceanfront views, really amazing space, and we moved into an abandoned Nordstrom rack at the street level of a struggling 1970s era open-air shopping mall in downtown Long Beach called City Place. The model of the outdoor shopping mall, which was still very inward facing and closing out the city, was still very much what City Place was built on. When we took over the Nordstrom rack, it was a statement about wanting to be closer to the street, closer to the community, and really opening up the architecture to invite people in, both physically, but also programmatically. So we created a community, like a conference room that's a shared space for community groups to come and use. We had a lot of ways of inviting people in to interface with us. I think we invested like $2 million of our own resources into transforming that office building. There was a lot more investment that followed in the years to come, which was kind of a testament to this idea of shaping the place intentionally does invite a lot more interest. So as urbanists, we've had aspirations for the kind of district this area could become, right? In the years that followed, the kinds of investment from both public and private sources, almost 19 million in the next year or two, really showed what that kind of relationship building can do. The city made a lot of public investments. They improved Harvey Milk Park nearby. We also saw improvements along 3rd Street right in front of our office with new tree plantings, more pedestrian-friendly infrastructure, traffic calming measures, simple things like bulbing out at an intersection, building a parklet, which we were a part of. All of that really helped reduce vehicle speeds, from people speeding on the street from 40 to 45 miles per hour. They just started following the speed limit, which again made the street feel safer to walk on, which made it nicer for more retail to come in and outdoor dining to feel safer. That's kind of what co-evolution can look like when people shape a place. That place shapes further investment. Investment kind of reshapes the community, and that can create a very virtuous cycle. And then, of course, you have something like the pandemic that completely breaks that cycle, right? I remember in 2019 walking across the intersection with a colleague of mine and saying, oh my God, I think we have it. I want to take a picture of this right now from the middle of the street because I see it. I see what the sidewalk is looking like. I see how active this feels, and I feel like we're getting there. Then, of course, when COVID hit, downtown Long Beach, which had been building a lot of momentum, stalled. The energy just evaporated overnight. And that for us was a big setback in terms of everything we were trying to build. And so one of the things we started to ask ourselves was, how do we bring life and connection back into the downtown core? Long Beach, especially downtown, already has a lot of the good bones of good urbanism. The physical aspects lend themselves towards that human scale walkable district, but all the life was gone. How do we bring the life back in? It began internally. We had a large office space which was not fully being used, so we started subleasing desks to bring in collaborators, creative tenants, hosting programs. Some of it evolved into an artist in residence program to support local artists or nonprofits involved in that work. We've expanded to also have a creative in residence program as a way to have space where other creatives can come and share resources with us. In exchange, they collaborate with us on our projects, which is great. It was almost an experiment to treat our office as an urban lab, to try all the kinds of things we would want to try everywhere, to try and get more urban life activated. With that picking up and getting some momentum since 2023, we've also been more broadly engaging with community groups, artists, small businesses, anyone who wanted to help reanimate downtown. We didn't have a roadmap. There was no big vision or guiding plan at that point, but we had a lot of curiosity and we were really willing to say yes to ideas and test them in real time, which I think was a big part of it. Over time, this looked like a lot of different types of activation, from art walks, festival pop-ups, creating outdoor poster exhibits, art displays, which were all in some way supported by or created by local partners, people devoting their time and their attention and their energy because they saw the opportunity like we did. Coincidentally, we also had a body of research come out from Cal State Long Beach, as well as partnerships with the Institute for Innovation, who helped identify that Long Beach does in fact have a critical mass of designers and design-related firms and firms involved in innovation. And this could be an opportunity to discover that, showcase the possibility to make a space for all of these people to thrive in downtown and really create an identity around it. So that's how it started. It wasn't really a directive. It was through a growing network of shared experiments and placemaking, pop-ups, and partnerships.
You've mentioned the critical role that RDC has played in the development of the Long Beach Design District, but I know it's not just one entity that's able to accomplish this much and fill vacant spaces and transform public space into a place community wants to be. Can you name some of the other partners that have been influential in this work and how they've helped shape the space, but also shape the community's response to space?
We're working with a wide mix of partners from Cal State Long Beach, Intertrend, which is a design-focused business in Long Beach, and their nonprofit arm, Creative Class. They do a lot of interesting work with art and activation in the city. We also have a lot of support to the point about investment. The fact that this work has gotten some legs and some momentum means we've got some support, both financially, but also in other in-kind support from Council District 1, from the City of Long Beach Mayor's Office, from LA County Supervisor Janice Hahn, but also a lot of local businesses and local property owners who've been very generous with their space and time to continue this work.
There's a clear connection between these design moves and investment patterns. What are some of the outcomes and the economic ripple effects that grew out of this early work of this design district?
We've actually managed to start filling in vacant storefronts. There was a vacant Chuck E. Cheese, which has now become the host space for the Immersive Design Research Lab from Cal State Long Beach. It's been exciting to see the university bring some energy into downtown because of that. There's a historic storefront called Acres of Books, which has been vacant for a very long time. It functions now as a gallery and exhibit space with a vintage store that takes up the back. There's energy and momentum we're seeing build as outcome from this in a very definitive way. Another thing we're starting to see is the ripple effects in terms of interest for creatives and businesses to incubate their presence in Long Beach. Our office is an example where we had an engineering firm take up a few desks as a satellite space because we were making those available. And now they've moved out to their own offices with plans to scale up from 12 people to over 100 staff over the next couple of years,
Wow.
which is new employment energy, new jobs, and new people in the area that we're really excited to see and continue to try and foster more of. We've also seen a lot of great traffic at events, pedestrian traffic. We've had anywhere between 3,000 to 4,000 people attend the Art Walk, which is hosted by the Design District in partnership with the Downtown BID, the Downtown Long Beach Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
There are also partners that I forgot to mention. We've been hosting the LA Design Festival as the Long Beach hub, which has been another great way to engage local artists. I'll end with saying this was a quote in a recent article that was published about the design district. It finally feels like a space that's not just being attended by the community, but being created by it.
I want to understand how RDC Studio 111 takes the approach that they have learned and invested in Long Beach and tries to duplicate, or maybe doesn't even try to duplicate in areas you're not local to. And if you could sort of walk through your work in other locales and how your presence not being there has led to a shift in the way you think about the work.
I think for the longest time, we have remained local to Southern California for that reason. We actually like knowing the communities that we work with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very powerful when you're able to be there, right? And not just reflect on it from afar. It's been a cultural thing to become long-term partners with cities. Even if we have a contract to work on one thing, we're typically invested in the place. We keep going back. We keep trying to understand how things evolve in a community and how we can help support where we can.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe, Roberto, you could add to this too, but I think there has been, it's definitely harder to templatize it in a lot of ways. I mean, there's some frameworks or there's some ways to think about it, about how to apply yourself in a community that maybe you're not a part of, but it always has to come back to who are the people there and how can you engage them? And then how can you make them a part of the process in ways that are more than just tokenism?
I think a good example from our firm was the SCAG Go Human project, which was about empowering local residents to engage physically in figuring out what the solutions for human-focused mobility would look like. So I felt like that was a very powerful example of merging that too, like bringing out people to get them excited about the improvements needed to improve their lives.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time working on the Go Human, and it's one of those projects that is close to my heart because it was this tactical urbanism initiative that tried to test in the ground real time before it got built so that community members could test drive it and tell us, hey, does it work? What works? What doesn't? How can this be made better? And we did that work across several cities in Southern California. And a lot of it was picking up cheap materials and then putting them in the ground to create bike lanes, to create, bulb outs, to create creative crosswalks, intersection designs that prioritize the pedestrian, and then leave it up in some cases for a month, in some cases for a day, in some cases for a week or two, and use them as tools to really talk to people about what they want their cities and their streets to be. My most favorite, well, maybe not most, I mean, I like all of them, but one of my favorite ones was this project to create a two-way bike lane on a street in Culver City. I live near Culver City, so I'm very close to that. It was a Safe Routes to School project to connect kids to La Bayona Elementary. And we were able to design a pop-up two-way bike lane that stayed up for a few weeks as a test to see what some challenges were and where we had to tweak the design. Ultimately, it was designed and implemented by another firm, but our work in it really helped test the ideas that were being proposed, which was very powerful. And typically when we do these things, it becomes another excuse to throw a party, have a block party, invite people to come out. All of that makes a difference in both creating some momentum around the work, but also in finding more reasons for people to get together and celebrate the fact that they can occupy their own public realm in meaningful ways.
How have these short-term neighborhood scale interventions led to policy change or helped investors feel more comfortable putting in more money to projects that reflect the elements or values that were proven out in this minimum viable product?
We did some work at the block in downtown LA near the 7th Street Metro Center. The big design move there was to remove the roof from this sort of Macy's Plaza, again, indoor shopping mall, and make that central atrium plaza of the mall open to the sky and connected to the street. One of the big design questions was, is this going to be a challenge to activate that plaza because it's not really connected or visible from the street?
Yeah.
And one of the things Alan Pullman initiated during the course of that work was, well, can we test it? Can we see how people move and what they see and how they feel? And so we did this public space, public life study where we use the cameras on the property to try and understand, where are people going? How are they moving? How are they entering the project? Is anyone walking from the street into the plaza? Is the plaza active? How are people using it? That kind of study told us a lot about how people were using the space and really helped inform decisions on how design changes needed to be made or where we needed to look at enhancements. In that instance, we found that the plaza did actually work quite well the way it was designed. It also helped us in the process of thinking about this idea for a mobility hub because we were connecting to the Metro portal. It allowed us to study where mobility enhancements make the most sense. Because of some of the results from that study, we realized that we wanted to move a bike share station from one side of the project to the other, things that just made it more intuitive for people to use those amenities. So it's about this idea of testing what you have to see how it can shape capital investment in meaningful ways.
I'm pretty excited about the Small Lots Big Impact program that's been between City of LA and UCLA. Basically, it invites architect and developer teams to transform publicly owned infill parcels in LA into high quality demonstration housing that can be replicated citywide. So the first stage that just completed recently was an open competition where a bunch of different architecture and developers proposed solutions that are pretty critical in Southern California because it's that missing middle, right? Either they're single family homes or the mega developments done by the big developers. This is a good marriage of public procurement needs that aren't satisfying the amount of housing that California and other states need to build, with that need to kind of empower other types of users in our city that aren't just the typical developers. So I'm pretty excited about typologies that we could easily replicate across the city that start filling up these, there's an empty lot here, there's surface parking, like so much potential. And we really need kind of policy, community, and private capital to all come together and facilitate something that's good for our city.
I like that. And I am curious, because partnership has been such a central theme to connecting hardware and software in placemaking. Can you speak to how you find the right partners that you either as a resident in a neighborhood look to help with activating space, or as a designer, you want to partner with to better understand the community if you're not local to that area? What are the types of partners that you found are good at understanding the challenges of a local space and might have the momentum to get something off the ground when it comes to these small scale interventions?
It can be a variety of people depending upon the context. Typically, one of the things I like to do is always zoom into, if we're looking at a space, who's managing it? Like, who is the person that has to be there every day, taking care of it, being its steward? And there's often a lot that comes from understanding who those groups are or who those people are, because they have a direct line of feedback about how that place works and what can be made to work there and what's going to be really hard to do and where some of the challenges are. So that's a very useful lens, but also looking more broadly at geography, right? Like, who lives in the area, who works in the area, what are some of the stakeholders that just happen to be there every day that are going to have either reactions to anything new coming there or are going to be champions for new things coming there. Those are usually stakeholders we want to have involved. Sometimes it's as simple as doing what we call stakeholder mapping exercise. We just spend the time in the place talking to people to understand who are those key players that have either successfully implemented something or that have the ability to reach a large portion of the population and that can help us kind of think creatively or differently about the place.
Thanks for tuning in to Building Better Cities. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to hit subscribe so you never miss another episode. And if you could help spread the word by sharing with someone, it would mean so much to us. To learn more about our work, check out buildingbettercities.com. We're excited to keep the conversation going. So until next time, let's keep building better cities together.